Okay, now we're going to learn Chav Ches Amud Aleph Masechta Beitzah. Rav Yehuda Omer Shoykel Adam Basar Keneged HaKli or Keneged HaKupitz. You cannot weigh. Stores were open on Yom Tov for people who didn't buy their food or needed more food on Yom Tov. But the method of doing business was different. So normally if you went to the butcher, he would weigh the meat on a scale. So that you cannot do on Yom Tov. But you could weigh it against another kli or against the kupitz, which was a kli to chop up the meat. You can't use the scale at all. You want to hide some food from rats in the pan of the scale, you're not allowed to use it for that. As long as it's hanging on those chains. If it's not hanging in the chains, then you can use it. A butcher who's an expert cannot weigh a piece of meat by his hand. He knows. He lifts it up. He knows exactly what it is. Can't do that because it's too much of an umanus, too professional to be done on Yom Tov. The butchers used to measure weight by displacement of water, like Archimedes. They weren't allowed to do that on Yom Tov either. They used to put a hole in the meat so they could hold on to it. You're not allowed to do that on Yom Tov. You couldn't do it with a kli, but if you use your hand, you could do it. It's a shinui. A Rav would put a certain simon to say that this piece of meat is kosher. They would cut it in a certain shape, and they would send it to their family, and they would know, oh, it's coming from this Rav, this is his simon of kashrus. He would sort of cut off the corners and make it like a triangle. They would weigh one piece against another piece. Like neither of our mandarim. Said you can measure against the kli. Like a piece of meat, low. They said you can't use the scale at all. So who is this mandar going like? The Gemara answers, Inu David Krab Yoshua, the time of Yoshua Omer, Shoiklin mana keneged mana biyan. You could weigh one piece of meat against another. On Rav Yosef Halacha Rabbi Yoshua, the halacha is like Rabbi Yoshua, Hoyel Usnan B'Choris Kavase. Since there's a Mishnah in B'Choris like in this Nan, Psulei HaMukdoshim Ana Asan LaHegdish. An animal that was...
Ernie, how can you weigh a piece against another one?
Why?
Without a scale?
Why? You have a scale. When we say that you could weigh a piece of meat against a kli, you cannot use the standard weights, but you can take a knife, weigh it against a knife. And then the next day you'd weigh the knife and you'd know how much the guy bought.
Oh, okay.
Or if you have another piece of meat, you can measure the two pieces of meat against each other, and he knows what it is. He's got a standard piece of meat. So psulei mukdashim anasan lahegdish. If an animal became puzzle, like a shlamim became puzzle, and they sold it, any benefit would accrue to hegdish. You're not allowed to weigh a bechor because it was kotshim once in a standard method, against the weight. It's a bizoyon to kotshim. But you could weigh it against another piece of meat. So the Gemara says, it's no proof that this is same Rabbi Yoshua. Rabbi Yoshua allowed you if there's no bizoyin kotshim. Avalasam, they could bizoyin kotshim low. But in our case, where there's bizoyin kotshim, maybe no. Or inami akan lakum rabban asam mishum loy mechzi koivdim dechol. Maybe the chacham say it doesn't look too much like uvd dechol, like something you would do during the week. Avalach the mechzi koivdim dechol maybe low. So lemeimer the kavdi adadi are the people Were they makpid carefully about this guy gets one piece, it gets another piece? I'll show you that they were not makpid. Vanu shaved benisa dosel bei Rebbe. There were 7 pieces of fish that were sent to Rebbe. Vishtaka chamish minah bei Rav Chia. 5 of them ended up with Rav Chia. The loy kapit Rav Shimon Rebbe. Rav Shimon Rebbe didn't care. Amar Papa Shadi Gavri Benau. Yeah, that's only if the 2 of them are involved. But if there's third party, they would care. Rab Chiv, Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Yosi, Rab Shimon, Rabbi Bar Kapora. Then, even though they were chaverin, they would be makbid. Mishnah. Ein mashchizin esasakin biyontiv. You cannot sharpen a knife on yontiv. Aval masial gabi chaverta. You could take 2 knives, and sharpen them against each other. You cannot sharpen on a stone sharpener. But if you had a wooden sharpener, you could sharpen it on wood. However, when we say that you can't use a stone sharpener, that's to sharpen it. But to remove fat, to clean the knife, that's mutter. According to that version, if you had a wooden sharpener, you could use it even to sharpen. Other people learn this on the Seifa, that b'shel eitz mutter. That if you use a wooden one, it's permitted. It's only permitted to remove the fat. To sharpen it, you could not use it. You couldn't even remove the fat with the Evan one, with the stone one. You may not sharpen a knife on yontif. Sharpen it. To remove the fat, you could. One knife against another knife, you could use it to sharpen. The Mishnah said you could do one knife against another. That's only to remove the fat. A sharpener, who is the Tana that says a sharpener is also? The Tanya ain't ben yontiv l'shabbat seloich nefesh b'vad. That all malachos are also on yontiv except for food. But Rabbi Yehuda Matar av machshira nefesh. He allows you to correct even kalim. So Rabbi Yehuda would allow sharpening. So that's why the Gemara says our Mishnah is not like Rabbi Yehuda. They told Rav Chizda that they darshan in your name halach Rabbi Yehuda. I wish all beautiful halachas should be darshan in my name. I was in front of Rava. He was passing a knife on the mouth of a basket made out of palm reeds. They asked him, are you doing it to sharpen or to remove the fat? It's to remove the fat. However, it looks like you sharpened it for sharpening purposes. So yes, he was of the opinion that you could sharpen, but it's not something you say publicly. He was wiping a knife on a mill. What are you doing it for sharpening or cleaning? He told me to clean. However, but I saw that he was doing it for sharpening. He held that it was the halacha that you could sharpen, but you can't publicize it. That's the halacha. You cannot be mashchiz. You cannot sharpen on a regular sharpener, but you can do it on wood or on another knife. But you don't announce it publicly, because then they will use a real sharpener. The the shoichet has to show his sakin, his knife, to a shoichet before he shechts, to a rav before he shechts, to make sure there's no pagam in the knife. Can you show a knife to a chacham on yontif? Rav Mary Braid Rav Bizna Shari, v'Rabbanan Asri. Rav Yosef Omer Talmid Chacham Roya La'atzmoi. The Talmid Chacham can check his own knife, and then Mashir Lachem, they can loan it to other people. On Rav Yosef Sakin Sha'amda, a knife that is not sharp, mutar l'chad b'yontiv. You can sharpen it. Hanamili u'de paska agav duchka. That it became this way because of, as long as it can cut, even though it's hard to cut. If you can't cut it all, you can't sharpen it. Whether it's a knife that became pogum or a spit that sort of got bent, you're going to stoke the coals of a fire on yontif. Whether machshire oichel nefesh are permitted to do on yontif. The Tanya. Ein ben yontif l'shabbos el oichel nefesh bilvad. Rabbi Yehuda matir af machshire oichel nefesh, like we had. My time, Tanakama, Amar Kra, hu levado yasel lachem. Who? Preparation of the food, v'lo machshire, but not the kelim. Rabbi Yehuda Amar Kra lachem, lachem l'chol tzarcheim. For you, anything you need, including the kelim. Ay Tanakama haksiv lachem. We need that drasha to say you can cook for Jews, but not for Goyim. For Rabbi Yehuda it says, hu levado, meaning only the food. Listen, ksiv hu, ksiv lachem. If you have a kli that you can fix Erev Yontiv, Avadi, you should click it Erev Yontiv. But if all of a sudden you don't have the kli on Yontiv, it broke. Therefore, you need to fix it. Omar Shmuel, Shpud Shenir Tzaf. If a spit got bent, also you can't fix it. So the Gemara says, Pshita, of course you can't fix it. You'll be masakin a kli. Lo tzrich dafal gav the mifshit bidei. Maybe you could bend it with your hand without a kli. And you might think it'd be permitted. So it's also, even though you could do it with your hand. Once you use the spit on yontif to roast a piece of meat, well, you have no more purpose for it anymore, so it becomes muktzah. Yeah, it's muktzah. You're allowed to pick it up and move it to a corner so somebody won't trip over it. It's only not muktzah, you can move it to a corner if it has a kazai's basar on it. Because that's roy for yontif. But Ravina, even if it doesn't have meat, you're allowed to move it. Why? It's like a nuisance. It's like a danger, like a thorn in Rosh Hashanah that you're allowed to move. The sugi of shpud, the sugi of shvachos, that if a woman comes in with many shvachos, you have to keep her busy. Otherwise, it'll be znus. The gumos and the din of shtei cyrus, to be an adult, that if the hair fell out, but there's a guma there, you assume that there's a hair there. These are dinim that were said by Rav Malkiyo. Bluris, which was a certain kind of haircut that the goyim would take. So a Jew is not allowed to give a haircut like that to a non-Jew to a certain distance. Afer makla, whether you could use ash on a wound, because it looks like you're making a tattoo. And the din of gvina, of whether or not gvina sakum is kosher or not, he said it's not kosher because they would wipe chazir on the face of the cheese. Those were dinim said by Rav Malkiya, not Rav Malkiyo. So you have to just remember it. But Rav Papa over Masnisa no Masnisa Rav Malkiya. I'll give you a better way to measure, to remember. These halachos that came down as a Mishnah or Baraisa were said by Rav Malkiya. A Shmaitza, which is like Omer Ravid Omer Shmuel or Itmar, that was Rav Malkiya. And how would you remember that? The Simonach Masnisa and Malkasa. A Mishnah has a higher level of provenance, so it's called the Melech. So that's how you remember Malkia. Now, what would be the difference between Rav Papa version versus the other version? It could be not Shvachos. The din of Shvachos would be a Hevdel. Because according to Rav Chinana, it would be Rav Malkia because it was not said in a Baraisa. Excuse me. Just the opposite. Rav Papa would say it's Rav Malkia because it was quoted in a Baraisa. And Rav Chinana said that Shvachos was Rav Malkia. So according to Rav Papa, the din of Shvachos is Rav Malkia. So they are, right now it's 3 versus 3. According to Rav Papa's version, it would be 4 versus 2. Okay. Go ahead, gentlemen.
Tomorrow?
Tomorrow, 7:30.